let's look at some of the particle modifiers. So let's just make, you can basically, to start this, you just need to make any object. Let's do a torus. And give it less, we don't need so many, maybe make it kind of more simplified so we can kind of watch what's happening. Okay, so make a simple torus. So over in your modifier, or sorry, over in your properties, not modifier, over in your properties section, we're going to click down to the one below the wrench, which is called the particle properties. Particles, well, I just have to kind of show you. It's a little bit, they're a little bit difficult to explain. So if you go to the little plus button here and click on it, you get two choices, emitter and hair, and these are the two kind of basic particles that you can create. And it's, again, this is used a lot in animation, but you can certainly use it for certain kind of effects or modeling. So it's actually probably easier to look at the hair modifier first and then move over to the emitter. So what it does is it generates a kind of, based on these settings, algorithms for how it's going to render whatever you want it to render. So this is the number of basically hair strands. Seed has to do with kind of where they're generated from. And if you bring this number way down, let's say to like 15, so we can really see 15 different hairs. Let's delete this. Okay, you can change the length. Bring this number down, okay. Make this a little higher. All right. You can tell it where you want it to emit these hairs from. Right now it's coming out of the faces. You can tell it to come out of the vertices, so it's always going to come out of a point. You could try that. Now, let's go back over to, we're going to come back and forth between these so we can kind of understand how they work. So if you go to emitter, nothing happens. But if you go down to your timeline here and you press play, you're going to see these little circles that are animated, basically little spheres, which is the default emitter. And you can do all sorts of things with these. You can, of course, increase the number of them. You can do all sorts of things to randomize them. So, for instance, if we go here, you won't be able to tell the rotation now, but let's see. Here, you can randomize how they come out. Now you also, right here where it says render, it's telling you what it's rendering. So if you change this to, let's say line, for instance, sorry, if you change it to object, now nothing's going to happen because it's not rendering an object. So if I go to mesh and let's make something else, let's make a cube, and grab that cube and drag it over and scale it down. Okay, so you got this object you created. So if you go back to your torus and you tell it here rendered as object, and then what happens when you do that, so if you go back to none, you lose a window. If you go back to object, it opens up a window here, and where it says instance object, if you click on this little square, it asks you what do you want it to emit. And we just created a cube, so I'm going to say cube. And now if you press play and you zoom in, you notice that what it's emitting are a bunch of little cubes. So let's see if we can play with this a little bit. So if you go to the scale of the object, you can increase its scale, and you can also change the randomness of the scale so that it goes anywhere from very tiny to whatever size object you make. You can go back up here and you can increase the number to a lot more. And this part tells you how long, like this is an animation from 1 to 200 frames. You could of course make this 500 frames, so it went a little longer. And then lifetime is how long these things stay present before they disappear, and they stay present for 50 frames. So if I make this the whole length of the animation, well now, there we go, they're going to stay, they're going to start being created and they're going to stay for the entire length of the animation. And you press the space bar anytime to pause the animation. So you get pretty cool looking space right here just by doing that. So of course, if I take this and I go, okay, well, I don't want to render a cube, I want to render, or I want to emit a bunch of Suzannes, I'm going to grab that Suzanne head and put it over here, and I go back to my torus and I say, no, I don't want it to render the cube, I want it to render that Suzanne head. Well, now you can do exactly that. All right, so scroll back up to the top, and now if we go back to hair, now, so particles or emitters change when you change the timeline. Hair is a static thing, so it doesn't change when you play it. So, but it still acts with the same setting. So right now we're rendering the hair as Suzanne heads, so those are all the hair particles. We can change that again back to the cube, and now the cube is rendered as the hair length can go up, the number of these can go up or down, the scale can go up or down, the randomness of the scale can change, so you can create all these uniform things. Super, super powerful, and also like you could spend hours just tweaking little things and playing with effects. Also, gravity. So where is my gravity setting? Trick here, F3. Oh, it didn't work. All right, I found earlier where the gravity was. Hang on. Okay, sorry I had to regroup there a little bit. Okay, to look for the gravity setting. Alright, so I made a new object and a second object that it would be emitted, so everything else is the same. So you're in your particle settings. If you scroll up to some of the other properties, there's this one, which is called your scene properties. And some of you who were doing this might have noticed that gravity was already checked. And if gravity was checked, then when you were emitting things, these things were dropping instead of floating. That's what they're supposed to do. I had gravity turned off, and when you turn gravity off, then they start reacting differently. They are reacting, they're emitting from all directions evenly. So if you wanted to create something that looked like it was sort of raining, you would have gravity on, and you could make the life of this much longer. So these lasted longer, and you could have the number, much less or more, whatever. You can change the velocity. So if you scroll this down, they're going to fall at a different rate. And you can change the rotation, so now these things are coming out at different rotations, different rotational orientations. So, all right, so that's basically just the scratching the surface of emitters and hair particle settings.